Hi there! In this new tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a screen print style poster design by creating a visual in the form of an illustration that can be used as merchandise to create t-shirts. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a like. It will motivate me to create more tutorials of my creations. We'll start by creating a 4000 by 4000 pixel file with a resolution of 300 for maximum quality in our rendering. We'll import our image. Then in Select and Subject, we'll create a selection of our main subject automatically. Then we'll create a mask using the icon at bottom right. I'll refine my selection by selecting the areas I want to delete. By selecting my mask and using the black brush tool, I'll erase the excess areas. I'll continue using the brush tool to erase the areas that bother me, to make my selection more harmonious. To achieve the desired effect, I don't necessarily need to do very precise cropping. On the contrary, to preserve a grungy, textured effect, you need to leave some flaws. Once I've finished clipping, I'll right-click on my layer and convert it into a smart object. This allows us to use our layer in a non-destructive way. Let's move on to the texture stage. To start with, we'll check that our color palette is set to black first and white second. Then we'll go to Filter, then Filter Gallery. We'll need to add several filters to our image. To start with, I'm going to add a halftone pattern filter. This adds a dot-like pattern to our image. To add a new filter, click on the little plus icon in the bottom right-hand corner. Once added, we'll select the Stamp filter, which will give a buffer effect and degrade our image a little. We'll add a Torn Edges filter, which will also degrade our image. I'm not going to give you any specific parameters, as this will depend on your image, so just play around with the parameters of each filter to find the rendering that suits you best. Once you're satisfied, click OK. By double-clicking on my layer, I'll open the Layer Style panel and add a Stroke effect to add an outline to my image. At this point I realized that I didn't like my effect, so to return to the Filter Gallery effect, I'll double-click below on my layer. This will reopen our panel and we'll be able to rework our settings. I decided to add a filter called Reticulation and drag it below all my filters to add grain to my image, which will ultimately add more destruction to my render. When it's okay, we'll add a kiseru, a traditional Japanese pipe. We'll start by clipping it and placing it where we want it, then right-clicking on my layer to convert it into a smart object. Then, as we did before, we'll go to Filter, then Filter Gallery, and find the same parameters as before. Now we need to rework the luminosity and contrast of our base image to get the best effect. For my part, I'll simply double-click on my layer to add a Brightness Contrast layer, save and return to my first working plane. Then start our Filter Gallery effect all over again. I decided to duplicate my layer and do my effect in 2 stages. In other words, I'm going to make 2 different Filter Gallery settings. The advantage is that I'll use a mask in the first to show only the area I want. Let's move on to adding the smoke. I'll import a smoke shape I've drawn beforehand and place it in the right spot. Once again, we're going to use the same technique as the previous 2, so I'm going to speed this up. What I've done here is the same principle as with the kiseru. I used 2 different filter galleries. And I used a clipping mask, with the first inside the second. Then I distorted it to create a different texture effect. The next step is to add shading with a different texture. To do this, I'll duplicate the layer of my main subject and right-click to delete all these effects. Then I'll create a new layer that I'll fill with white, position it under my subject layer and, by selecting both, convert them into a smart object. Then, by Alt plus left clicking on the little double circle icon on my previous layer, I'll drag and drop it onto my layer above. This is a shortcut for duplicating effects on my layer. We did this to generate a texture over the entire surface. We'll use it as a shadow below our subject. Then I'll double-click on Filter Gallery on my layer to set my effect. Once I'm satisfied, I'll drag this layer under the previous layer. On the layer above, we're going to do a Ctrl plus left click, which is a shortcut for creating a quick selection of the elements in our layer. On this layer, we'll create a mask using the icon at bottom right. Then use the brush tool to erase the areas we want to transform into shadows. I'm going to add a threshold effect layer at the very top of my layers to accentuate the degradation of my image. Then use the brush tool to erase the areas we want to transform into shadows. On the layer above, we're going to do a Ctrl plus left click, which is a shortcut for creating a quick selection of the elements in our layer. Then, using the Paint Bucket tool, we'll fill our selection with white and drag this layer below the other two. Then we'll drag and drop the stroke effect from the layer above onto our white layer. I'll go to Fill and set this value to 0%. This will make me erase the white area but leave my stroke effect, and I want to place this layer on top of the others and adjust it. A few more small corrections on my shadow layer. And then we'll select all our layers and convert them into a smart object. From here, we're done with our main element. We'll move on to the composition of our poster by adding text. I'm going to go faster in this part because it's a simple matter of mixing several typographies together and getting them to fit together. For this last typography, I'll show you how I'm going to customize it. By double-clicking below it, I'll add a stroke effect in the same color to thicken it. Then I'll create a group into which I'll drag my typography. Then, by double-clicking on the group, I'll also add a stroke effect, but this time in white. We'll repeat the same operation with a new group, dragging the previous group inside and applying the green stroke effect. Once the typography part is ready, we'll select all the text layers and transform them into smart objects. First of all, we'll double-click on this layer and change the light green typography to dark green. This will be very important for the filter gallery section that follows. Otherwise, the font may disappear. Once this is done, we'll go to Filter, then Filter Gallery, and play with the previous parameters to achieve the desired effect. I'm only going to set my effect for the lower part of my text. Once back on my work surface, I'll duplicate my text layer and hide the parts one want to keep. This way we'll have 3 layers with different, customizable effects. Once this is done, we'll add the ripple effect to each of the 3 text layers in Filter, then Distort. By varying its setting slightly, we'll distort the outer appearance of our layers for a more gradient effect. I'm going to add a white outline to my layers to make them stand out from each other by opening the Layer Style panel and adding the Stroke effect in white. Then I'll add my composition. Once finished, I'll convert all my text layers to Smart Object. We'll now move on to the color part of our image. On each layer, in the Layer Style panel, we'll add a Color Overlay effect to fill the layer with the color of our choice. The problem here is that this causes us to lose our gradient texture effect. To do this, we'll hide this effect from our layer, then go to Select, then Color Range, and select Black. Then apply a mask by clicking on the small rectangular icon in the bottom right-hand corner and make our effect reappear. We'll repeat this operation on our other layers. When we do the same thing on our main subject, I notice that the selection has created a white border that frames our image. To do this, I'll simply Ctrl+ left click on my subject's layer to retrieve its selection. Then with the Paint Bucket tool, we'll fill our selection with light green, and that's it. All that's left is to correct a few details. To add a little depth, I'll add a cloud shape in a group. Then, inside my group, I'll add a rasterized texture, duplicate it so that it's more visible, and then drag this group under my other layers. I'll take care of correcting certain details. Once we're happy with our rendering, we'll select all my layers and turn them into a smart object. From here, we'll remove the white parts of our layer by going to Select, then Color Range, and selecting the white color. Then we'll select the rectangular mask key tool and right-click on our image to choose the Select Inverse option and create a mask on our layer by clicking on the small rectangular icon at bottom right. Now we've finished our illustration. We're now going to integrate it into a poster. To do this, we're going to transform our white background into a black one. I'll simply import a paper texture that I have in my file bank and then crop my image. Then I'm going to apply a clipping mask to my illustration to make it fit inside my layer. I realized that a small element was missing, so I simply added it to my smart object. Back on my work surface, I added a brightness contrast layer. I don't think the rendering is realistic enough, so I'm going to duplicate my paper layer over it and apply the multiply mode in blend mode, which will let some texture pass over my image and make it more realistic. And here's our final rendering. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the comments space. I'll be delighted to answer them or help you. If you liked this video, please subscribe and leave a like. It will motivate me to create more tutorials of my creations. See you on the channel.